Good morning and welcome to Unfiltered Vision News, bringing you the news unfiltered Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern. My name is Dr. Ashaki Noni Nichols, and I will be your host. Thank you so much for joining us here on Unfiltered Vision News. I hope everyone had a wonderful resurrection weekend over this past weekend as we did celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is really what that day is about. Nothing more, nothing less. A gift that was given to us for someone else sacrificing themselves. So, with that, let's get into our Kids Corner.
Boy's ruined sandcastle taught him the power of never giving up. You won't believe what happens next. He felt sad when the waves washed away his castle, but he didn't give up. He learned that mistakes are just a step. To try again, he started building again, stronger and better than before. Every mistake helped him make a taller, stronger castle. Suddenly, a bigger wave came. This time, he didn't cry. He smiled and thought, I can try again. Resilience is believing in yourself. He tried again and again. Each time his castle grew taller and stronger. Little by little, he understood patience and courage. Finally, he built the most beautiful castle. It stood strong even when the waves came. His hard work and hope paid off. This teaches us, no matter how many times you fail, keep trying. Mistakes are steps to success. Be patient, be brave, be resilient.
Yes, all of those things. It's just remembering, yes, be resilient, right? Even I have to remember that. I'm telling you. I had a little bit of a meltdown this weekend or last week, and it was just hard, there are certain things in my life that I was like, God, why isn't this happening? Why isn't that happening? I'm trying, and I'm feeling like a failure. And God's like, you're not a failure. Just keep moving forward. Just keep on the path. It's going to be okay. So I don't know who out there needed that this morning, but just stay strong and be resilient because it will pay off. And so let's get into honoring God with our body. So God, please guard our mind and our thoughts. God, help me to fix my thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. So I will think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. God, please protect my ears and help us listen to your voice. God, help me to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. God, please protect our eyes from sin's damage. God, I make a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully. God, please speak life over our mouth. God, set a guard over our mouth. Lord, keep watch over the doors of my lips. God, please help my hands to serve generously. God, help me to do good to everyone, and especially to those who belong to our family in the faith. And God, please protect our reproductive organs and help us to honor you, God, with purity. God, help me to honor you with my body. And God, please protect our feet as we walk along our path. God, let your word be a lamp for my feet and a light on my path. And guys, it's been an amazing weekend. And I wanted to start out with just some encouragement and also to just help those out there that are seeking God or just who might have questions. Now, I know that there's been the video circulating of Paula White and her comparing Donald Trump, or President Donald Trump, sorry, to Jesus. And it's been really interesting and convoluted. Now, on the one hand, I can see what she was doing to give encouragement, right? Because for those of us that are in the church, there might be, your pastor going through something, or it might be a brother or sister going through something, and reminding them, those who follow after Christ are going to suffer many hardships. I think maybe, and this is just me, had she presented it that way, people would have been like, okay, but she left out that part and just gave this direct correlation to Jesus. And I was like, ooh, for those that are not spiritually in alignment, it or babies, I should say, spiritually, they're going to misinterpret that, right? And so it is for those who are seasoned, I should say this, in the Word of God to make sure when you are going to present something like that, you have to present it from the initial way I said. It's like, look, those that are going to be champions for Jesus, Jesus already told you you're going to be persecuted for my sake, period. You're going to be persecuted. And here's my thing, if you're not persecuted, are you doing the right thing? Just saying. Look, just saying. Because if you are one of those things praised and you're doing things that are not in alignment with Scripture, are you really following God? Are you really doing the work of the Lord? Right? But I wanted to bring out a point that was made about Paula White. And that point was she does a prosperity type ministry. There was I guess it was something she was doing for Easter, and it had a cross and it had like all these other things, and saying that, with your dollar donation, you'll receive a blessing. And there have been many prosperity ministers outside of her who pretty much done the same thing. But I wanted to bring it back to Scripture where it talks about to not do that. So the passage, one of the one of the few passages, there are about three that I found, but I saw this one as being most relevant, is in 1 Timothy 6, verses 5 through 10. And this is the NIV version. It says, and constant friction between people of corrupt mind who have been robbed of the truth and who think that godliness is a means to financial gain. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Okay. So just reading that small passage, I'm sure as I was reading, you're like, ooh, yeah. I've never personally been a champion of those who try to use the gospel to attain earthly riches, because as you can see from the Bible, it says don't do that. Do not do that. Be content, right? And that's godliness, because, there's a saying, people are like the grave, they're never satisfied. And when they're saying that, it's the heart of some people, right? That they're never satisfied. They get something and they gotta have more. Gotta have more, gotta have more. It's like, whoa, calm down. When are you going to be just content? Just look around and be like, yeah, thank you, God. This is more than I could have ever prayed for. You've kept me and held me. Thank you. When is it that part? Right? So I wasn't sharing that with you to kind of crash and burn on Paula White, but I wanted to bring some perspective to the attention, right, that has been cast upon her from her words and from her actions. Right now, we have to be very careful spiritually who we don't want to say put on a pedestal. Because sometimes even pastors can be idolized, and we're not supposed to idolize anybody. And so you need to be really mindful spiritually, what you're doing. Are you following God or are you following man? So, again, just to put that out there. Now, next, we're going to get into some of this news on the Monday recap. And apparently, the UCLA women's basketball team, they won championship. So, woo, woo, woo. We're going to show that video and shout out to Cheryl Miller and her brother Reggie Miller because that is their alma mater.
Aragon is out in Westwood tonight where the team just arrived back to campus. Rachel.
Yeah, for the first time in program history, Susan, we know this team right here, the women's basketball team at UCLA, now national champions. There were so many student alumni still here cheering on these women, of course. I'm told the team arrived at LAX about 8:45 or so, then got bused here to Westwood to celebrate. Take a listen right here as that bus rolls in here on campus. Yeah, so much joy right there, as you can see. So many fans as well as students and alumni out here. Again, Bruins dominating South Carolina. As we mentioned before in our report, we know that the top starters, those 5 players posting double digits tonight, really putting on a show for fans and alumni here as well. And something I learned today, Susan, I was just fascinating. One of these players, her name is Megan Grant. She's a dual athlete. She plays on the softball team, but at the beginning of the season, she played here for the basketball team. So she's now a national champion when it comes to women's basketball and now playing softball right now at this season. So again, just highlighting the talent here and the program at UCLA. But again, back here live, you're seeing a little bit still of some of those fans, but so many people just so excited for this team and again for these women who are making history tonight. Reporting live from Westwood, I'm Rachel Aragon. I'll send it back to you.
Well, Rachel, I have to repeat something that Laura Diaz said a couple nights ago when they got to go to the championship game, and she said it's just so thrilling for those of us who are of a certain age to see women's sports be celebrated like this, to see the women's team be celebrated so thoroughly.
That's such a good point, and so many people here, I don't know if you could tell from the video, Susan, men and women just so excited and here to celebrate and greet these women, of course, and celebrate their win and, of course, their historic championship. So as you mentioned before, it is beautiful to see, of course, and for those who are UCLA fans or have come in with there, it's also an extra special night, of course.
Very good. Bravo to the women's. Thank you.
Yeah, because again, as you were saying, women of a certain age. I think I would put myself in that classification, maybe a little bit younger, but still. Just remembering when women's sports was kind of like, yeah, you guys are women. Yeah, you got a championship. But in my opinion, until there were the Cheryl Millers and Cheryl Swoops, because Cheryl Miller, from what I know, she never played professionally here in the United States. I want to say the WNBA came around when she was still coaching women's basketball. But that was kind of the trajectory. If you were going to continue on with any type of basketball career, a lot of those who were at a high level in women's sports, they went on to coaching, right? Or maybe went into commentary, right? In different sports avenues, but really to just see how elevated women's sports has become is a beautiful thing. And the other beautiful thing is, making sure that it's just biological women. Just saying, I had to throw that in there, just for a little bit of context for those that, don't understand that women are women. And that's it. And good morning to everybody out there listening this morning to Unfiltered Vision News. Thank you so much for joining us. And with that, let's get into our trending topics on X. So I found 3 so far. So this one was interesting because this one happened 5 hours ago. Trump shares a Mall of America video highlighting Somali crowds, which I find interesting only because, that it's like we've kind of known that, right? But I'm like, okay. So the video shows families in hijabs and traditional attire filling the mall's walkways, paired with an unverified claim that 83% are on welfare. Minnesota is home to the nation's largest Somali American community of 64,000 to over 108,000, many refugees from the 1990s who contribute 8 billion yearly to the economy despite high welfare use. Now 81,000 of households per the 2025 report and poverty rates near 30%. Critics labeled the post racist, right? While supporters saw it as a call out on demographic changes and fiscal cost, echoing Trump's past criticisms of the group. And here's my whole issue with it. In my opinion, it just, and I'm not picking on those from Somalia. It really shows how immigration in its various forms, right? Whether it's asylum seekers or those that are refugees, people coming here legally, right? Or illegally, it can damage the country if it's done in excess, right? If it's not done proportionately. Now, a lot of us don't remember or recall, but I did cover this on my show a couple of months back, where the United States at one point, they did not allow anyone from any other countries to migrate here to the United States. Even if they were trying to come over here legally, there were certain countries that were barred from coming here. Okay. They weren't having it. They wanted a Nordic country. Now, if you guys know what Nordic is, it's not brown. Okay. It's not brown. Now, this is during the time where, I want to say it was after the Emancipation Proclamation during reconciliation. They outlined which countries were okay, which countries were barred. I even went over it last week with Wong Kim Ark. During that time, those of Chinese descent were not allowed to become naturalized in this country. It was disallowed, right? And so a lot of people really were like, yeah, okay, this is where the 14th Amendment was abused because his parents couldn't even be naturalized. Now it says born or naturalized. They try to hide when Wong Kim Ark under being born, but that can't be true because it was written for slaves so that their descendants in perpetuity would have the ability to be citizens without having to apply for citizenship. It restored that part. But people claim just, well, it meant just soil. It meant this. No, it didn't. Because here's the reality. If those things are true, from what people are saying, then there would be no reason for the 14th Amendment, right? Because the Constitution already has a clause under naturalization. It already has it. It's already in there. So why was the 14th Amendment even needed? Right? If it was just soil. There was no need. There's no need for that amendment at all. But they did it because they needed an amendment to make slaves that were freed citizens of this country. But not only them, they had to apply to their descendants as well. That's why it says born or naturalized. Because if it was just soil, again, there will be no reason to put or naturalized. Yeah. So here's the video. And this video is pretty old. Maybe it might be newer, but there's several videos in my, that I've seen. And it says Donald Trump posted video of Somali people enjoying the Mall of America to the soundtrack of Mad World because he is bigoted. He is a bigoted. Oh my. Just putting it out there. Okay, well, that's your opinion.
In my head, I wanna drown my sorrow. No tomorrow, no tomorrow. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. In my head, I wanna drown.
I can understand where it's coming from because it doesn't look like the United States. It looks like a completely different country. It does. There are so many people concentrated in one area that it doesn't look like America because these people haven't assimilated to life here in America. They live here in America. They're benefiting off of America, but they could care less about having any allegiance to the United States. They just want to benefit from it. And that's where I'm saying, you guys can go back to your country. If that's where you feel most comfortable, then leave. We don't need you here because you don't care about this country. You care about what you can get. Now, on to our next trending topic. It says thousands filled Times Square and churches for Easter worship in, New York City. Says B1 Church organized the 11 a.m. Times Square event, drawing thousands who swayed to music and heard messages on large screens, all live streamed to reach more people. Catholic churches like St. Patrick's Cathedral overflowed with young adults, filling masses at places like St. Joseph's Yorkville. Conservative Post hailed a Christian resurgence in New York, while unverified claims suggested Mayor Zoran Kwame Mandani was upset. One Manhattanite joked about skipping church for brunch, claiming being waspy is cool again. Wow. The gatherings highlighted rising youth interest in traditional services amid the holidays annual draw. Spelled waspy would be white American. No, I'm saying white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Yeah, Anglo-Saxon. So wow. Okay. That's what they're comparing it with. So Times Square, New York City is flooded by Christians worshiping Jesus on Easter Sunday. Mandani is furious. Maybe there is hope for New York. And, the reason why I do, like a lot of people refer to it as Resurrection Sunday, is because Easter was actually a pagan holiday. Totally separate conversation. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but you might want to research it. But at the end of the day, the purpose, and a lot of people don't go to church outside of Christmas and Easter, right? Those are the 2 days where people really come to church to either find God or worship or really get their lives turned around.
Oh, come on. It's not going to be Mike Signorelli that does it. But Jesus Christ of Nazareth is going to touch your mortal body. And he's going to heal you even while I'm preaching. There's people who want...
Very cool. Surrounded and people of all, different ethnicities, I should say. We're here. So it's one of those things. Well, the Muslims said that they respect Jesus. Where were they? I don't see many. But maybe there's some sprinkled out in the crowd. Hopefully there were. And let's see, the last one, and we've kind of heard a little bit about this. So California high-speed rail faces $126 billion cost and endless delays. So approved in 2008. Wow. Okay. 18 years ago. With a $33 billion estimate, the project now carries a $126.2 billion price tag for phase one, from San Francisco to Los Angeles and Anaheim, per the Rail Authority's latest plan. A 119-mile starter segment between Merced and Bakersfield shows progress, with 80 miles of guideway built and revenue service eyed for 2033, though full service might wait until 2040. Officials, amid early mistakes and stake federal aid and private funds to close the $90 billion gap, while critics decry it as government waste and terminated federal contracts. And it's sad because it was one of those things. It was like, wow, this would be great. And they even wanted to put high-speed rail in different places, like I want to say from Georgia to Tennessee down to Florida. And I'm just talking about Georgia as a central point, and then going west of Georgia into Alabama. They wanted to make it to where individuals could maybe live in Georgia but work in these other states, and as opposed to driving their cars to commute, they could just use the railway. If they were centered close to Atlanta, they could just take the rail and just go where they needed to go. Or if they were near the rail, either north or south, they could go to these central stopping points and get on the train and go to work. That was the ideal. And what we learned in California, I think it could work. But the question is, what really happened to the money? And they've not really done any, in my opinion, compliance or auditing to show where did the money actually go? Why wasn't the rail built? Why do they keep pushing the dates back, right? Where is this fraud, waste, and abuse? Because $33 billion back in 2008 it went a lot further than it does now. So again, what happened to the money? That's what we need to get back to. And I think everybody has that same question. What happened to the money? What are we doing? What's going on? Now let's get into our Promethean update.
Panel reacted yesterday when they got the news about the March jobs report.
This is one heck of a report, folks. Wow is right, Steve Moore. Non-farm jobs coming in 178,000 jobs. The expectation was 60,000, folks. We didn't get a loss in manufacturing jobs. We got a hit of 15,000 manufacturing jobs. Private sector jobs, get this, folks, 186,000. 186,000. The estimate was for 70,000.
Now, if you understand what President Trump is actually doing, those job numbers shouldn't surprise you at all. 1 year ago, on April 2nd, 2025, it was Liberation Day, when the White House announced it was dumping the free trade system to put America first. And the president has done it. He is ending that system. And the establishment's Atlantic magazine put it in their own terms with this headline: America is now a rogue superpower. Now, they mean that as a condemnation. We take it as a compliment, because what they call going rogue, we call liberation. But CNN ran a poll this week that said Trump's approval rating on the economy hits a new low. Well, of course they did. When you can't argue with physical reality, you argue with feelings. They want you in the role of the anxious consumer, not the informed citizen. Because an anxious consumer doesn't understand that Donald Trump is liberating us from a very evil system. Here's what they won't tell you. The British free trade system was never just economic policy. It was a weapon of imperial control, the mechanism that stripped our manufacturing base, killed our middle class, and turned a nation of producers into dependent consumers. I'm Susan Kokinda. I've watched the deliberate dismantling of America's industrial economy for 50 years, and that's why I know what Trump is doing is revolutionary, and why I need you to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons so that we can reach more people and stay in touch in this vital fight. Here's what I'm going to cover today. First, the state of Trump's economic revolution 1 year after Liberation Day. Second, what going rogue really means strategically. And third, the new diplomatic architecture which is rising in the place of the old imperial order, from Moscow to Beijing to Cairo to Washington. So 1 year ago this week, President Trump liberated the United States from what the White House called the illusion of free trade. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio put it more precisely at the Munich summit recently.
Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence.
That's the confession the empire didn't want on record. Because if deindustrialization was a conscious choice, then rebuilding it is also a conscious choice. And that's exactly what you're watching. 2 days before the jobs report, Donald Trump's special trade advisor, Peter Navarro, was pointing to new manufacturing data, which shows new orders up, production rising, and supplier deliveries surging. And then Navarro made a critical point that all of this matters because manufacturing does not fake strength for long. When orders rise and production follows, the signal is real. You can only run a factory so long on sentiment. At some point, steel gets cut, machines get turned on, and goods start moving. Now, the White House Liberation Day statement filled out the picture. Our trade deficits are down with China by over 30% and with the EU by over 40%. But here's what those deficit numbers actually mean on the ground. Our industrial production index is now at the highest since 2019. The United States has surpassed Japan in crude steel production last year for the first time since 1999. And manufacturing productivity has had the biggest annual increase in nearly 2 decades. Then, the day after the anniversary of Liberation Day, those jobs numbers landed. And here's one of the other panelists making a point that matters the most.
I think one of the things this tells us is that employers believe that the situation in the Middle East is temporary, and they're planning for the future, and they're hiring workers according to this report. And so it appears that employers and businesses believe that Trump is right.
That's the structural shift Navarro has been describing. Businesses are not reacting to simply a quarter. They're making bets on a new American economy. And President Trump put his own exclamation point on it. Not only were the jobs numbers great yesterday, 178,000 new jobs, but the trade deficit was down 55%, the biggest drop in history. Thank you, Mr. Tariff. Now, it's true. Many Americans don't yet feel this personally, and the media is counting on that. But ask yourself this question: why don't you feel it? Because for 50 years, the British free trade system stripped out the productive economy that would let you feel it. At one time, 31% of our jobs were directly in manufacturing. Now it's only 8%. And those were the jobs where one income could raise a family. And as Secretary of State Rubio said, it was a conscious policy to deindustrialize. President Trump has declared war on that system. And like the American Revolutionary War, it's going to take time to secure our independence. But the fight has begun, and we are rebuilding our productive capacity and producing things again, not just consuming them. A nation of consumers is an economic colony. A nation of producers is sovereign. And that fight between the British system and the American system has been raging for over 250 years. That's the battlefield, not today's price at the pump. And that's exactly the fight Promethean Action has been covering for decades, when nobody else would. This didn't start with Liberation Day, and it won't end with one jobs report. But if you understand the battlefield, you'll understand why Donald Trump terrifies them. And I want you to stay on the right side of this fight, so subscribe to Promethean Action's free newsletter. The link is in the description. Plus, the battle lines are also being clarified on the strategic side. Since the end of World War II, the British Empire has told us who our friends and our enemies are. The free world versus communism, the West versus Islamic extremism. Never mind that along the way, they had a big hand in creating those enemy ideologies. The result of that is we've ended up fighting to keep their world intact. One of the key neoconservative architects of that world and of the last 35 years of perpetual war in the Mideast just admitted it. Robert Kagan, who happens to be married to Victoria Nuland, herself an architect of the Ukraine crisis, confessed in The Atlantic this week in the article that was headlined, "America is Now a Rogue Superpower." Here's what Kagan said. The Trump administration, however, has turned America's long-standing hierarchy of interests upside down. For 8 decades, Americans were deeply involved in the greater Middle East, not because the region was intrinsically a vital national security interest, but as part of a broader global commitment to the alliances and freedom of navigation that undergirded the American-led liberal world order. Well, it wasn't American-led, but did you catch that? We weren't fighting for American interests. We were fighting for the liberal world order, the empire's management architecture. Kagan said that in his own words. So when Donald Trump breaks from that and fights for American and not imperial interests, well, that's what Kagan calls going rogue. And this week, Trump told the press exactly what's going rogue in practice in reference to NATO. Here's how the BBC covered it. Asked by Britain's Telegraph newspaper if he is reconsidering U.S. membership of NATO, he said, "Oh, yes, I would say it's beyond reconsideration. I just think it should be automatic." And then the BBC let it all hang out by declaring Trump's invective underlines again his misunderstanding of how this 32-member alliance works. Well, Donald Trump understands exactly how it works. And the response of NATO over the past month has given him the political capital he needs to end the liberal world order. Kagan said it himself. For 80 years, America was in the Mideast not for our security, but to enforce the liberal world order. NATO was the institutional architecture of that enforcement. And when Trump refused to treat it as automatic, when he asked what's in it for America, the alliance is crumbling. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a sovereign nation asking a sovereign question for the first time in 80 years. So the old architecture is fracturing. The question is what's being put in its place. The answer is already visible, if you know where to look. David Rennie, who's The Economist's geopolitical editor, made a confession similar to Kagan's in a discussion where he described how China looks at Donald Trump.
I've listened to them tracking Trump since the first term when I was in Beijing and then through into the second term. They currently think of him as you say, chaotic and difficult to deal with, but also a tremendous opportunity because they say, and I do believe them because I always, the more cynical they are, the more truthful I think they're being because they are exceedingly cynical, is he is the least hawkish person in Washington they know. He is more willing to let China buy high-end American chips, to invest in America, that his transactional, selfish, me-first instincts are an opportunity for China. One of the things we heard was, if this Iran war weakens him too much, that's actually bad for us. Because if he's really weak in Washington, then that foreign policy blob, the kind of the hawks waiting in the wings, they get maybe more power. So they like dealing with this chaotic, selfish, transactional, not very hawkish Donald Trump.
Think about that. The Economist, which is the mouthpiece for the City of London, is admitting that China understands and welcomes what they fear. China would rather deal with a strong, sovereign, transactional America than with the, quote, foreign policy blob, the hawks waiting in the wings. And both China and Russia are busy carrying out back-channel discussions through Pakistan and other Middle Eastern countries to bring the Iran conflict to an end. Russian President Vladimir Putin met with the Egyptian foreign minister in the Kremlin this week, and he made a very measured comment. Naturally, the situation in the region remains a shared concern. We all hope the ongoing conflict will be promptly resolved. As you know, President Trump also addressed this issue yesterday. Let me reiterate that we are prepared to make every effort to stabilize the situation and, as they say in such cases, return it to normal. Not exactly a denunciation of the United States. But here's where it gets more interesting. Russia is engaged in the same kind of transactional policy centered on economic development, which characterizes Trump's policies. TASS said that Putin is also discussing creating a green and energy hub in Egypt. And the energy part of this deal with Egypt includes nuclear power, not unlike what the U.S. is doing with some Gulf states. This is not chaos. This is what a world of sovereign nations looks like when the imperial management layer is removed. Multiple powers pursuing their own interests, making deals based on what actually serves their nations rather than what serves Kagan's liberal world order. So where does that put us? 1 year ago, the empire told you that tariffs would be a catastrophe. Here we are today with our manufacturing base reawakening, the composition of our labor force changing, and the trade deficit down dramatically. 1 year ago, membership in NATO was inviolate. The special relation with the UK was intact. And today, Kagan is declaring that the United States has gone rogue from that liberal world order. Well, what they call rogue, we call independence. And here we are 3 months from the 250th anniversary of our independence from that very empire whose system Trump is now challenging. And we are less than 9 months from the vital midterm elections, which will determine whether the president can fully reassert our independence. If you want to be equipped to be part of that fight, go to our website and join Promethean Action as a supporting member or contributor. Because, like the American Revolution, this isn't going to be won in a couple of months. This has been your Saturday Brief. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free.
Yeah, when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is a good thing. Because that's something that I was actually saying, when I was running for president, it's like, we don't make anything anymore. We are consumers, but we're really not producing. So I'm glad that that is actually being addressed. And so I went into Grok because I really need to dig a little bit deeper into the jobs numbers that were reported. So there were non-farm payrolls. Okay. So it was 178,000 jobs were added, right? And it's far exceeded economists' expectations of only 60,000 jobs. Private sector jobs, 186,000 against the 70,000 projected. Unemployment is down to 4.3% from 4.4. Manufacturing jobs are up 15,000, and that's a gain, not the expected loss or flat reading. And that's good for us, right? So supporting manufacturing and industrial data highlighted. The report is framed alongside hard data showing a manufacturing resurgence. So industrial production index reached its highest level since 2019. U.S. crude steel production surpassed Japan for the first time since 1999. Manufacturing productivity posted its biggest annual increase in nearly 2 decades, and rising new orders, production levels, and supplier deliveries. Okay. So that means, I'm just saying that things are going in a good direction. Now, trade deficit improvement. The trade deficit dropped 55%, called the biggest drop in history. Deficits with China fell over 30%, and deficits with the EU fell over 40%, attributed directly to tariff policies. Now, a lot of people are like, the trade deficit, yeah, theirs is dropped. Ours is increased. It doesn't show that ours is increased, but it shows it's dropped. So we're not taking in as much as we used to, right? So that means China isn't benefiting and the EU isn't benefiting off of America the way it used to, because we're finally making our own stuff. And we're finally using our own stuff that we make, and I'm putting it in those terms, right? So I asked another question. I said, can you outline what this means for the American people? So here's a balance in the data. As of March 2026 jobs report means for everyday American people, workers, families, consumers, and communities. So 1, job creation and employment stability. So the economy added 178 non-farm jobs, far above the low expectations. Unemployment rate edged down. And what this means for you. The labor market remains relatively resilient with low layoffs. So if you have a job, it's generally stable right now. Job gains were concentrated in healthcare, social assistance, construction, transportation, warehousing, and modest manufacturing gain. So slower overall hiring pace, 25 to 26, compared to post-COVID boom years reflects factors like reduced net immigration and policy shifts. So immigration did play a part in this. Okay. This could mean fewer easy job opportunities in some sectors, especially for new entrants or those in declining areas. Okay. Yeah. So that pretty much means a lot of people that are not from here aren't getting jobs, but Americans are, which is how it should be. Right. Manufacturing and blue collar resurgence signals manufacturing added 15,000 jobs, better than expected losses. So broader indicators show strength. Industrial production at multi-year highs. U.S. crude steel production surpassing Japan in 2025, first time since 1999, and some signs of rising new orders and production, which is good. Again, that's a net benefit for America, which is wonderful, right? What it means for the American people, positive for industrial workers and communities, longer term potential. And here's the caveats. Manufacturing employment is still down overall since early 2025 in some analyses. Gains are modest so far, and many few factories require skilled workers, welders, mechanics, engineers. Not everyone qualifies immediately. Training and education gaps could leave some behind. So, but here's the deal. They put in last year free education for people who want to get back into these fields. So I would encourage you, if you are interested in working in any type of manufacturing, look up free education because they are giving it for people who want to use their transferable skills to get back into manufacturing and engineering. Trade deficits improve and buying American. Yeah. So the official data shows U.S. goods trade deficit narrowed notably in the year after Liberation Day, down 24% in some periods of prior year, with bigger drops in China, negative 32%, and EU 40%. So it's getting better. Wages, cost of living, and family finances. Average hourly earnings rose modestly, 9 cents to 37.38. So that's about the average, with annual growth at 3.5%. Okay. So, broader economic and uncertainty factors, right? So there's an optimistic view, there's a cautious, realistic view, and bottom line for most Americans, right? We're doing well. We're getting better. And I said, can you outline the type of non-farm jobs? Because I wanted just to see. So healthcare, right? 76,000. Of which 35,000 were working, returning after their strike at Kaiser Permanente, which was a rebound normalization effect, not necessarily new demand. Ambulatory healthcare services rose 54,000, hospitals 15,000. Construction jobs, they were up 26,000. Transportation and warehousing up 21,000. Manufacturing up 15,000. Social assistance up 14,000. Primarily in individual and family services. Leisure and hospitality up 44,000. Notable losers or flat areas, government negative 8,000, right? Federal government negative 18,000, particularly offset by local government gains. Continued contraction in federal workforce. Financial activities down 15,000. So mainly finance and down and insurance down 16,000. So other sectors, professionals, information, wholesale trade showed mixed or small changes, with overall growth described as nearly broad-based but still concentrated. So basically, your desk jobs, your government jobs, they were either flat or negative. Okay, but the blue collar jobs doing well, construction and manufacturing. So, together added a negative 41,000, positive but modest relative in total. These tend to offer higher average wages for non-college educated workers and support chains. So manufacturing, so the construction, they're still doing a little bit better than just a desk job. One-time factors, the healthcare strike rebound inflated the headline. Without it, private gains would have been lower. So there was a strike, so that brought those numbers higher. Revisions. February was revised sharply downward to a negative 133,000, making March look stronger by comparison. Okay, so February's down, March is up. We're always 1 month behind because obviously we have to go backwards to track the numbers. So what this means for job seekers and workers is a strong demand in care and essential services. Manufacturing green shoots is sustained. This could mean more factory floor mechanics or production roles, especially in regions benefiting from tariffs and shoring. Limitations. Growth is uneven. High skill or white collar sectors like finance saw losses. Many gains are in lower to mid wage service jobs or rebounds rather than broad acceleration. Long-term unemployment has risen slightly, and some analysis note the labor market is recalibrating with slower overall hiring needs due to demographics. So depending on where you are and what you're applying for, that's what that goes back to, will determine what kind of work you're able to get. But I'm hopeful things are going to turn around. Now we've got 2 more videos before we get to our first break. Now this one is looking at some deportations of people from Iran living in the United States.
Y'all, thank you for watching today. Go ahead and hit that like button, my people. You know that it helps us out a ton. And of course it helps you because it helps us keep bringing you these stories every day. Now, y'all do remember about 6 years ago when Donald Trump came out and announced that he had killed a top Iranian general named Qasem Soleimani? Many of you may not have known, and you still may not know, why that was such an important, I would say, success for the United States. Because during the Iraq War, Soleimani was credited with having helped the Iraqi forces, those who were fighting the United States. You remember when our military was just getting, having a tough time over there in Iraq? Remember things weren't going so well? Well, word on the street, y'all, was that Qasem Soleimani was helping the Iraqi militants make more deadly weapons, particularly improvised explosive devices that were called IEDs. They make these IEDs such that they could punch through all kinds of tank and armored vehicle armor. And they say that he was like the mastermind behind making those IEDs so deadly. And so when Trump got him, y'all, a lot of people celebrated. And now, y'all, word comes that his niece and his niece's daughter have been living in the United States with permission. And not only that, but that the niece at least continues to support the Iranian regime while living here, y'all. And now Marco Rubio, good old Marco, y'all, he has discovered this, and now looks like they're going to be getting kicked out of the United States.
The niece of a slain Iranian general and her daughter arrested by ICE here in Los Angeles after their green cards were revoked. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says they voiced strong support for the Iranian regime. Fox 7's Rachel Aragon joins us now live from Tujunga, where the two had been living. Rachel.
Yeah, with this war in Iran escalating, continuing as we speak right now, Susan, a DHS spokesperson recently stressing that holding a green card here in the U.S., they're calling this, of course, a privilege. They also stress that anyone who poses a serious threat with that status could risk having their legal status here revoked.
Now, in this next segment, y'all, this is so funny. I guess this is going to be her neighbor. He's like, hey, this is just a quiet little street. Nobody would have suspected that we would have somebody like that living on our, like, come on, man. Like, what do you expect? What do you expect her to do? I mean, she's just the niece of an Iranian general.
Actually, I was surprised, and it was quiet everywhere. So.
Residents living along this serene and quiet Tujunga neighborhood shocked to learn about their next-door neighbors, the niece and grandniece of slain Iranian general Qasem Soleimani. The two were taken into custody by ICE on Friday.
I wasn't home, but my wife told me that they've been like an hour.
These are photos of Hamadi Soleimani Afshar, identified as Soleimani's niece, and her daughter from their Instagram accounts. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said he revoked their green cards, citing Afshar's vocal support for the Iranian regime and social media posts celebrating attacks on U.S. military personnel.
Now, this is an important reason, y'all, that Marco Rubio, that I support what he's been saying, which is that living in the United States is a privilege. It is not something for people who are in the country with a visa. They don't even live here usually, or maybe temporarily. For people who are here with permanent residency, this is a privilege, and you do have to uphold the certain norms and expectations of the United States and any country where they go and allow you to live either temporarily or permanently.
Rubio saying on X.
Right. Because here's the deal. Residency, green cards, visas, does not give you the privileges and benefits of being a citizen. And I think this is that it's not a weird gray area. Maybe it is, where people are like, well, I'm in the United States. I can say whatever I want to. You don't have allegiance here. So no, you do not. And I think that's the line that needs to be drawn in the sand. I know a lot of people were upset when that student, I think it was at Harvard or one of those schools. And, he was doing all these protests and different things, and he was arrested, and his citizenship was challenged. And everybody's like, well, he's just a student. He has freedom of speech. He's here on a visa. He is not a U.S. citizen. And that's where people get under. Your stuff can be revoked. You got to go home. You can't be doing that here on our soil because you're not a citizen, either by born or naturalized. You would fall in the naturalization category if you wanted to be a citizen, but then you have to give up your allegiance to the country you left. And see, that's what's not challenged. So I'm really glad that Marco Rubio is doing what he's doing.
That until recently, the two have been living lavishly in Los Angeles. In the post, he goes on to say the Trump administration will not allow our country to become a home for foreign nationals who support anti-American terrorist regime. Neighbors say the two kept a relatively low profile.
I mean, did you ever see them come by?
No, I never saw them.
From time to time we did. It wasn't all the time.
The world is a safer place without these monsters.
This is President Trump in 2020 after Soleimani was killed by a U.S. airstrike in Baghdad. DHS says his niece, Afshar, entered the U.S. in 2015 and obtained a green card in 2021.
So it looks like ICE, y'all. Looks like good old ICE has the niece and her daughter in custody right now. And you have to wonder about those people who have been protesting ICE and who have been against ICE lately. How do they feel about ICE serving this role? How do they feel about this on a whole? Like, do they think that the Iran sympathizing niece of a top general who probably was responsible for the killing of, who knows, maybe hundreds of United States service members, do they think she should just be able to get to stay? Is it like, well, hey, she's not him. She gets the freedom of speech. Freedom of speech. If she wants to support Iran from within the United States as a guest, freedom of speech. First Amendment, Papo.
And the niece and grandniece right now of Soleimani are still in ICE custody, waiting removal proceedings from the U.S. We should also mention offshore that niece of Soleimani, her husband, is also barred from entering the country. Pre-live tonight, I'm Rachel Aragon. I'll send it back to you.
Rachel, is this a unique situation, or has the State Department pulled other people's green cards in relation to relative to the Iranian conflict?
The State Department also just addressing that soon. They said actually recently they also removed the legal status of a daughter of a high-ranking Iranian official as well as her husband. But as we heard right now from the department itself, they're calling, of course, a green status a privilege, and anyone posing any kind of threat, and especially aligning themselves with the terrorist regime, runs that risk of having their status revoked.
Rachel Aragon, thank you.
Now, my question is this. ICE is going to deport them almost certainly, right? But where do they deport them to? Like, I can't see that they're going to be able to fly them into Iran and say, hey, take these ladies back, right? Like, there's no real way to get them into Iran, what with the war that's going on and all. So do they just stay in United States custody awaiting a thaw in tensions? Do we send them to a third party country, you know, like maybe one of these countries that's been working with Iran to negotiate with us, Pakistan perhaps. Who knows, y'all? What do y'all think is going to happen to these ladies? What is your opinion on this? So we have two questions here. One, what is your opinion? Do you think they should be kicked out of the United States? Or do you think First Amendment, they should be able to say what they want? First Amendment, people. Or do you say, nah, they gots to go? And if you do say they gots to go, how do you think we get them back to Iran? Or should we even worry about that? Or should we just say, look, get out the United States. You can go to Mexico. You can go to the Maldives. You can go to Senegal. You can go to Pakistan. We don't care. You just gots to go. Let me know what y'all think about all this. Drop a comment down below. But before you do, please stop, hit the share button.
Yeah. In my opinion, they should be sent to the nearest neighboring country, right, that we are dealing with, right, as far as we're on good terms. And then they need to figure out how to get back home, because that's on you. Your green card status does not allow you anything but entry into our country and permission to stay here. You violated. Because what people don't understand, again, you are not a citizen, which means you do not have the rights and privileges. You do not have any protections under the Constitution because your allegiance is to another country. You're visiting here. Okay? It's not your house. Basically, you don't get to go to somebody else's house and like say, yeah, we support these other people outside of your house. Why are you in my house? You can go home. Bye. See you when look, you don't have to go home, but you got to get up out of here. And that's the thing. You do not have, you know what I'm saying? You don't have to go home, but you need to leave here. So, my opinion, nearest neighboring country, I like it. I think that works. And again, thank you for everybody joining me here this morning on Unfiltered Vision News. Now, let's get into another update of what's going on with the conflict. And hopefully they're going to get to some type of peace deal. So let's see.
The president posted a Truth Social saying Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, appearing to refer to his previous post where he threatened Iran's power plants and bridges if they do not open the Strait of Hormuz by Tuesday. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Rick Crawford says the president is urging Iran to take that diplomatic off-ramp.
What he is telling people is that I want to give them a diplomatic out. He's trying to give them every opportunity to make the right choice, do the right thing. And I think that window is going to be open for a little while longer, but after that, it's going to close decisively and the president will take action.
President Trump told Fox News' Trey Yingst that negotiations are currently underway, and he believes there's a good chance a deal could be reached by tomorrow. However, Trump warned that failure to comply could result in the U.S. seizing Iran's oil. Iran's parliament speaker responded to the threats, claiming the U.S. will gain nothing from what he termed, quote, war crimes, and saying the only solution is for the U.S. to end this, quote, dangerous game. President Trump will deliver a press conference tomorrow where he will also likely discuss the successful rescue of the F-15E crew member who was shot down over Iran on Friday. But joining us now is Ambassador Mike Froman, former U.S. Trade Representative and current president of the Council on Foreign Relations. Ambassador Froman, first of all, happy Easter. Thank you for taking the time with us. We're so happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So we've seen the Truth Social posts today. The left is not happy about them, but President Trump issuing a very stark and very colorful warning to Iran. Do they take the off-ramp or do they face the consequences? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think we've all learned to sort of separate the signal from the noise. And the signal here is clearly that the president is losing patience with the Iranians. He set deadlines before, but now we have a massive amount of armaments in the region. We've gotten the flyer out, thankfully, over the last 24 hours. And he seems to be saying that this time he means it, that if they don't reopen the Straits of Hormuz by Tuesday, there will be further attacks on their infrastructure and on their power plants. I think the real question is on the negotiation side of things. We're now talking about talking. We're trying to get to the table and have a meaningful negotiation. When you look at the 15-point proposal that the president has laid out and the 5-point response that the Iranians have laid out, there's almost no overlap. So it's hard to see a fundamental agreement on the underlying points, hopefully we can return to a situation that existed prior to the war when the Straits of Hormuz was open and oil and other products were flowing through there freely.
Ambassador Froman, thanks very much for joining us this evening. I want to talk about Iran's leadership. The U.S. and especially the Israelis have been targeting Iran's leadership. But behind all of that is the Revolutionary Guard Corps. They have been entrenched in Iranian society for decades. Do you get the sense that after this conflict is finished, or at least as part of all of this, that there could be a better government that emerges, or is this an Iranian government that will emerge that's more dangerous?
Well, there's no signs. Westerners are often looking at Iran to say, where are the moderates that we can deal with? And we've done so for decades. There's no real sign that the current leadership in Iran is moderate in any way, whether it's the new Ayatollah or, of course, the IRGC, as you mentioned, which controls not just the security apparatus very effectively, putting down protesters, killing tens of thousands of them, but also controls a significant part of the economy. And so it's very unclear. At the end of this conflict, Iran is clearly going to be a much weakened military power with its nuclear capability, its missiles capability, and other capabilities that it had seriously degraded. But it still may be a very oppressive regime without much moderation to be seen.
You know, Ambassador, on that note, we've taken out many of Iran's leaders. How difficult does that make negotiations? You know, who are we negotiating with? How familiar are we with them?
We don't have a lot of visibility into what's going on inside Tehran itself, at least not publicly. And so, yes, the new Ayatollah hasn't been seen. The IRGC is still very much in power. The Speaker of the Parliament is engaging publicly and with us. The Foreign Minister is engaging. And so we deal with the people that we can deal with. We don't really know who's calling the shots back in Tehran, which complicates the negotiations. But again, hopefully behind the scenes, more clear things are being said to each other. There's more space for negotiation, and hopefully we're having real communication between whoever they tee up and the folks on our side.
Ambassador, you said we have our proposals, they have theirs. There's not much light in between them. You know, we got different. You know, it's very difficult to negotiate. Correct? Is there a possibility that you don't need a deal? We stop attacking you, you let the strait open. The simplest of all, just no fighting. Is that possible, that something like that could happen?
That's not only possible, it may be the most likely solution. I think that the difference now is that Iran has demonstrated that even with seriously degraded air defenses, missile capabilities, drone capabilities, and naval capabilities, it can still wreak havoc. It can still shoot down planes, sink ships or damage them, chill shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, and it may tighten its control over the Strait of Hormuz if the U.S., which has traditionally been in the business of keeping open the sea lanes of communication, these important shipping lanes all around the world. That's been a fundamental principle of the U.S. Navy, of the U.S. military strategy. If we're no longer in that business, then Iran may well impose a toll or let only those ships that it is comfortable and it wants to let out into international commerce.
Ambassador, how has this war changed the regional relationship, not just the United States and Israel and Iran, but also the Gulf countries? It seems, you know, Iran's response has been extremely aggressive, going after the countries that hold a U.S. presence. How does that change the politics and the geopolitical conversation in the region?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the decision by Iran to retaliate not just against Israel and the United States bases, but against Kuwaiti oil facilities, Qatari gas facilities, lots of other countries in the region, including Oman, has now driven those countries to want to take action, want to defend themselves, and conceivably to work more closely with a U.S.-led coalition in the region. And so these countries are looking at their security going forward. They see an Iran in the future that may be wounded, but maybe like a wounded animal in the corner that strikes out at its neighbors in unpredictable ways. And that's a very dangerous situation for them. They're going to want to have close relationships, I believe, with the U.S. going forward.
Ambassador Lisa here, if I heard you correctly, you said the potential end result could be walking away after reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. If that's the case, was this worth it? If that's the end result?
Well, look, for 47 years, the Iranian regime has terrorized not just the region, but U.S. interests around the world. I mean, what has changed over the last year has been the willingness of the U.S. Together with Israel and some of its regional partners, or some of the U.S.'s regional partners, to take military action to change the dynamic. So to the 12-day war last year, to bomb the nuclear facilities, the aggressive efforts to degrade their missile capabilities, to sink their official navy, those are all new elements there. And we leave Tehran in a much, much weakened position. They're no longer going to be able to wreak the kind of havoc they did before, but they still, this is the thing about asymmetric warfare. You know, for the U.S., in an asymmetric warfare, asymmetric war has to win. Iran just has to survive. It just has to not lose. And with relatively few capabilities, it can still cause a lot of chaos in the region.
Ambassador Mike Froman, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm glad we're able to, get some explanation on that, a little bit of clarification. So with that, let's take a quick break and we will see you on the other side.
Lineage, legacy, leverage. Genealogy is the lane. Community is the destination. But care, that's how we get there. At TBAT Task Force, we don't just research history. We reclaim what was stolen. For Black American descendants, proving who you are is the first step toward reparative justice and recognition.
Get 4 hours of expert research, a verified certificate, and a care-based session to guide your next steps. A $155 contribution doesn't just fund your search, it fuels 5 community positions. It's a cycle of growth.
Ready to claim your history? Start your journey or book a free care call today. Your legacy is waiting.
Yes, and definitely check out TBAT. And I will make sure to put their link in the repost. So if you want to do your genealogy, I've done it myself, learned a lot more about my family tree, as my father had done my genealogy report years before I had run into TBAT Task Force. So thank you guys so much for the work that you are doing. Now, I wanted to get a little bit of feedback. Her name is Simone, and she is working with MS Now, right? Because MSNBC, they've kind of done a rebranding to MS Now. I find it interesting. It's like you've done a rebranding, but you're doing the same thing you've always done. So I'm like, why did you go through the rebranding? But anyway, let's just check out what you have to say about Dems and the SAVE Act.
I have been warning about this for weeks, and now here we are. In trying to oppose the SAVE Act, Democrats have actually backed themselves into a corner, and now we're potentially staring down a vote on a national voter ID bill. Let me ask a very simple question. Since when is the Democratic Party for voter ID? Because let's be very clear about what is actually happening. The Save America Act is not about voter ID. It is about requiring proof of citizenship, talking passports, birth certificates. Some of these are papers that millions of
What I find fascinating is just, when have Democrats ever been for voter ID? I'm like, did you hear what you just said? Okay, let's continue.
eligible Americans do not have access to. Oh, and if you are a married woman who has changed your last name, well, good luck. This is a completely different standard. But instead of forcing that distinction, instead of solely having that conversation, the conversation has now collapsed into, do you support voter ID or not? And that, folks, is a trap. Because the argument for voter ID is actually built on a premise that does not hold up. People are not showing up to the polls pretending to be someone else in droves. That's actually not a widespread problem. We already verify identity in multiple ways throughout the country. Signature matching, right? Flawed, but a way to verify. Voter files, database checks. I mean, in everyday life, you can move money verify who you are without pulling out a physical ID. So, what problem are we actually solving here? We're not solving one. What this does is shift the frame from access to restriction. And once you concede that frame, you are no longer arguing about whether people can vote. You're actually arguing about how hard it should be. And now because of that shift, we are talking about a national voter ID bill while the Save America Act is still looming in the background. I clearly have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of questions. We had Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada on our show Thursday night, and we pressed her about it. I asked her all of the things I just said to you here. And this is what she had to say.
Schumer is saying that Democrats would vote for a national voter ID bill, and now at least there's one Republican senator that is talking about bringing it to the floor under unanimous consent. Signature, I don't think the question on the table isn't whether people want to verify who they are when they go to vote. A voter ID is about the fact that Republicans are saying that people are going to vote as other people who they aren't. That's not an issue in America, so why would Democrats support that?
You know, I'm not sure what Leader Schumer was talking about, but I can tell you this. I guess we better have a conversation.
Seems like Democrats need to have a conversation.
Yeah, you do. Because everything that you said, ma'am, stop it. People should prove that they are citizens of this country in order to vote. Now you say nobody's doing this en masse. Well, then why are there states that do not require ID at all? In California, there's no ID required when you show up to vote. And to that, people have gone to the polls that are citizens of this country, that are registered to vote, and they're told, well, you already voted. How is that possible? It's possible because there are people showing up with no ID voting in their place. That's how that's happening. And whether you agree with it or not, that's fine. But nobody's audited that. But it's happening. In New York, no ID requirement. So you can't say that people who are not citizens aren't voting if there's no ID requirement. But see, this forces citizenship check and ID requirement. I also like how, I like it, but I don't like it. If someone gets on the roll and somebody signed them and said, oh yeah, this is a citizen, and they wind up not being a citizen, that person gets to go to federal prison. I kind of like that part. I like that there is some consequence with this. That means people are going to take a lot more care in who gets on the voter rolls, because right now we have something called a motor voter position, and that's in California, it's here in Georgia. And what they will do is they will take somebody's word, whether they're a citizen or not. And if they say they're not a citizen, they're still automatically put on the voter rolls until it's checked that they're not a citizen. Why would you do that? Now, I'm okay with putting them on a list that says non-voter, right? But you shouldn't be putting them on the voter rolls until you check out if they're a non-citizen. If they've said they're a non-citizen, then they don't get to vote. And it should say on their ID, someone suggested this on the back that says non-citizen, ineligible to vote, period. It should say that in big, bold, black letters on your ID. So if you show up anywhere trying to vote, you can't. But see, that would be a state issue to do that. With national voter ID, you have to do it, and we would all be in accordance. And that's what people don't. They don't want the uniformity. Yeah, they want to be able to be rogue. Just do what they want to do. We already know who your new voting bloc is, Democrats. Everybody knows. So let's move on from there. Now, I found this video from the Daily Signal talking about birthright citizenship in respect to how they think SCOTUS may actually not necessarily have a ruling, but a position, right, on where they think birthright citizens should be and who should be handling, right? Like I said before, I think they're going to treat it like Roe v. Wade and just turn it back over to the Senate and House, right? Turn it back over to Congress, where with Roe v. Wade, they turned it back over to the states and said, states, you need to do it. I really don't think SCOTUS is going to have a true position on it, and they're going to turn it back over to the states. But again, that's my opinion, but let's see what they have to say.
Birthright citizenship. So if you would like to tell us how you feel.
Well, I mean, the countries that abuse it. So the first person born, I think this year, they had a big celebration. First American born was from China, and it was somebody who was coming here to abuse the 14th Amendment. So we have literally thousands of people coming from China, flying over here, using our facilities, probably for free, having a baby, flying back with a baby, and then saying that they can come anytime they want as guest of their child who's a U.S. citizen, who probably doesn't speak English and have any idea. Same thing happened when the border was open. I think I told you that, I mentioned this to our audience. I think it was around 1991 or 2. I got a knock. I was fast asleep, and I just had a rickety fence then. And I went outside, and it was raining, and there was a pregnant woman there with a guy. Neither one of them spoke English, but she had a piece of paper, and it had a well-known Selma doctor, OBGYN. And it had her address and phone number, but it had the address of the Selma, and she wanted to know how to get this is before GPS, how to get to the Selma hospital. And it had her name and her address in Oaxaca, Mexico. And from the little Spanish, I used to be able to understand some, and she said that she and her husband were from, or her compatriot they had driven up for 2 whole days from Oaxaca. And she looked like she was gonna, I thought she was sweating and she was in pain, and she wanted to go to have this particular doctor, not just the Selma Hospital, this particular, who had delivered so many children from her larger extended family and friends in Oaxaca. And where did all that come from? It came from the 14th Amendment, which was really addressing slavery, most of the elements of that amendment. And it said that if a person has a child in the United States and is not subject to an allegiance to a foreign country, that child should be a U.S. citizen. But because of court decisions and custom and practice, we never really had this abuse of it like we've had. So the irony is that Mexico sends people to do that. China does it. Central America does. And none of those countries allow anybody to do it to them. And I think of the 30 or 35, 40 European countries, there's only 1 or 2 that have half. You can have one parent, not a citizen, in other words. But otherwise, you have to have both parents as citizens before you're born. So the Trump administration is saying, is this crazy because this anchor baby means that people are coming across the border with no affinity toward the United States at all, having that baby at enormous cost, $50,000, $100,000, and then either claiming that they have to stay here to take care of this American citizen, or take them back, raise them until they get to a considerable age, 10, 12, and then they have apply for a passport, and then they accompany them, and they're giving preference on green cards and tourist visas. And then eventually that child will sponsor them as their anchor. And it defies the logic and the spirit of the 14th Amendment. So then when you looked at the arguments, Ketanji Brown is getting a reputation as somebody who, I don't know how to put it. She's not able to reason logically. She just can't do it, and she talks more than any other justice. They always time how much justice. She talks probably more than all of the conservative justices put together. Clarence Thomas has more sense in his little finger than she does, but he never says much because when he says something, it's pretty good. But she talks, and she made the most ridiculous argument. She said, well, if I go to Japan as a tourist and somebody steals my wallet, then I deal with it with the Japanese legal and criminal system. So I'm pledging my allegiance to them. Do I? And so I guess if I had a child, and then she stopped. I thought, are you going to put your head in the noose? Because what you're saying is if you had a child, then you think that would be a Japanese citizen. And of course it isn't. So how is that relevant here other than to show something would be no sane country in the world would do what we're doing? And you think that anytime a person sets foot in another country and is visiting or that they have shown allegiance to that country, people come from Mexico as citizens, they are showing that allegiance to that country. And if you don't believe me, go to a soccer stadium in any major city like LA Coliseum. Every time we've had an American team versus a Mexican team, the 2 million illegal aliens of LA County root for Mexico. And when you saw the ICE demonstrations, we saw this bizarre disconnect of people burning the American flag of the country they want to stay in and proudly waving the Mexican flag. And when I go to get groceries, I'd say 1 out of every 6 cars has a Mexican flag on the window decal. And of course, there's 50 Mexican consulates in the largest number of consulates of any foreign country, and they're here for one reason, for the 30 million illegal aliens, probably 20 million of which are from Mexico. And so they have allegiance. I think they still do it. There's a soccer field about a mile away from here next to a park. And every once in a while, when they have elections in Mexico, we get candidates that come here. And they have a big nighttime rally, and they try to whip it up, and they vote. So I think those peoples, by any normal standard, that are here illegally are legally as non-U.S. citizens. Their allegiance is not to the United States. So when they have children here, they should not be. Does that mean that the justices are going to agree with the Trump administration? No. The justices' attitude will be this. Well, we did some controversial things. We left abortion up to the states. That was a very brave move. And we knocked the crazy guys like Judge Brodesberg and those crazy Judge Furman and all those lower district courts. But this is a bridge too far. We've gone for 150 years with this stuff, and we can't just, it's illogical, it doesn't make sense, it's contrary to U.S. national interests, it's costly. But I don't want to be tarred and feathered for overturning this. We'll get every DEA group, we'll get the La Raza caucus, we'll get the Black caucus. It's just, and that's what I know, that China's abusing it and everything, but it'll not be seen that way. It'll be seen as hurting people of Hispanic heritage. So they won't do it.
You think that they'll just allow it to keep on going,
Yep.
keep on keeping
They
on?
know it's wrong. They know that no sane nation in the globe does it. The Europeans, who say how left they are and how we're far right, are far more right-wing than we are on this.
I'm sure Mexico doesn't even do
Mexico
it.
doesn't do it.
No.
No. Well, Mexico has in their constitution, and they've kind of changed the wording to tone it down, but 20 years ago it said that immigration shall not change the ethnic composition of the Mexican people. Think about that. We don't want any gringos coming down here who are white and don't speak Spanish, because they would be a drag and they would destroy our ethnic essence. If the United States had copied the Mexican Constitution until it was slightly euphemistically changed, everybody would say we were racist. But Mexico's racist.
Yeah.
The people who are coming here say they're economic refugees. Many are from southern Mexico, but the subtext to that is they're economic refugees because Mexico is a racist country and sees them as indigenous Indians and treats them like dirt. The people in Spanish who claim that they're conquistadores and they're direct descendants from, Hernan Cortez himself.
But back to the birthright issue, do you think that the Supreme Court then is just going to pass it on, and basically the implication will be Congress just needs to make a law about this particular issue, and so they'll just
but
kick the
there
can
was
down the
never a
road?
law, though.
No.
It was just a court interpretation decades ago that said the situation wasn't like it is now. It was a theoretical conjecture. Well, if you come here, you know, you can. It was for people who were freed slaves, and there was never under the Constitution had been counted for as 3/5 of a citizen, not for races from the North, but from the South, for purposes of getting legislative congressional districts, but nobody had ever said what the status of their children was. So after the Emancipation Proclamation, the end of the Civil War, 14th Amendment, who gave them other rights, said, you know what? All they have to do is have a child, and we'll extend to anybody. They'll be citizens. But they had no other allegiance but to the United States. And
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. That makes sense. Right? I was so glad I found that video. I was like, yeah, it lays it out perfectly. The 14th Amendment was only written for a specific group of persons. That's why it says or naturalized. Because the freed slaves were unique in that when they petitioned the court to say, hey, we're not being treated equally, even though we're freed, the court said, then you're going to have legislation that writes your citizenship into the Constitution in an amendment so that you will have citizenship in perpetuity down to your children. That is why it says born or naturalized. That it says under the jurisdiction thereof. That is why it outlines that allegiance. Now I want to get into our last video before I get into all sides. And this again is from the Daily Signal, but it's talking about the narrative of the conflict we're in at right now. I'm not going to call it a war, but it says the narrative of war. But I'm like, yeah, it's still a conflict. I know we've got people in the air. I know they're talking about getting boots on the ground, but until Congress gets involved, he still has, well, he's got less than 10 days at this point. It might be a week, it might be 7 days. What are you going to do? Because the last 30 days that he has needs to be withdrawing, not going further in. So we'll see what happens with this.
The opposition to the war, we've talked about the divergence between the political reality and the military reality, and we've talked about why this hysteria is so sharp, so excessive. I'd like just to go back, though, and talk a little bit about the military reality. I've never seen, and I don't think any of us have ever seen, a 30-day campaign like that. They have no air force. They have no navy. Can they resupply? Can they bring in missiles? Can they bring in drones? Well, they can't do it through the Strait of Hormuz. We've destroyed all their transport aircraft. They can't go to a third-party country, pick up Russian drones and fly them back. We've controlled the airspace. We have done amazing work to attrite their drones and their ballistic missiles and their nuclear facility. But in 30 days, it's almost impossible to guarantee that we can find and destroy all of the dispersed assets that are being used to attack our allies in the Gulf and Israel. However, we are making enormous progress. I think at some point the military needs to get a better narrative about regime change. Hello, this is Victor Davis Hanson for the Daily Signal. This week we are discussing various elements of the current American and Israel joint effort to denuclearize or make the Iranian military inert. We've talked about the opposition to the war. We've talked about the divergence between the political reality and the military reality. And we've talked about why this hysteria is so sharp, so excessive, so, I don't know, beyond imagination. I'd like just to go back, though, and talk a little bit about the military reality. I've never seen, and I don't think any of us have ever seen, a 30-day campaign against a country the size, almost double the size of Texas, with 93 million people, where they have destroyed all of their air defense system. The United States and Israel enjoy complete air supremacy. What does that mean? That means that tactical aircraft like Apache helicopters and Warthogs that are vulnerable to air defenses are not vulnerable because there is no air defenses. So they're roaming the skies and the coastline of Iran at will. That's very unusual. We've never quite seen that in a war. More importantly, the population we are starting to hear is starting to make sounds that they may want to go out in the street again. Why do I say that? Because when you have tactical aircraft, you can spot and target individual government efforts at checkpoints, intersections to hurt the people, and you can attack them. And now there's stories that the Speaker of the House and the Prime Minister is at odds with each other, and the theocratic control. We're starting to hear that 12-year-olds, that's reminiscent of the Iraq-Iran war that started in 1980, are being used on the premise that the United States and Israel, unlike the Iranians themselves, would not kill children. And by the way, we're looking at almost exclusively military targets while they're using cluster bombs aimed at civilian targets. But they assume that we wouldn't go to their level, and they're probably right about that. We're not. But it shows you that they're very worried about the control of the population. They have no air force. They have no navy, and I'll get to that in a minute. They have a dissident population, as I said. Can they resupply? Can they bring in missiles? Can they bring in drones? Well, they can't by traditional sea. They can't do it through the Strait of Hormuz. We've destroyed all their transport aircraft. They can't go to a third-party country, pick up Russian drones and fly them back. We've controlled the airspace. The Russians or Chinese don't dare to try to go in and land at the Tehran airport. The only thing that we're hearing is that across the Russian border that borders the Caspian Sea, they're sending by Caspian Sea transport, probably nocturnally, weapons to northern Iran. That may be true, but we can stop that as we did the narco supplies to the United States if we want to, and I think we will do that. Then there's the question of how much did all this cost? The Chinese and the Russians don't come cheap, so how much did all these aircraft cost? How much did all of these hundreds of missile launchers, 3,000, 4,000 missiles, maybe 5,000 or 10,000 drones, all that tunnel complexity, all of these nuclear proliferation sites, all of these ballistic missile factories, all of this naval aircraft and naval assets, maybe, I don't know, $1 trillion over 20 years. It's all up in smoke. That's going to be hard to explain, as is, how do you explain to the people that you spent precious dollars when they're starving, not just on terrorists, but Arab-speaking terrorists? There's not Persians in Hezbollah. There's not Persians in Hamas. There's not Persians in the Houthis. You've made this argument that you're at war with Sunni Arabs, and yet you're giving Arabs money out of your pocket, and the civilian population will not like that when it's added to the vast cost of resupplying this arsenal, which is, if this regime survives, as sure as the sun comes up every morning, it will start using what foreign reserves is left to buy not food or not oil or gasoline or consumer goods. It will be buying weapons to replenish the things that we've destroyed. So the military side, as I said, is going very well. The political is not so well for the reasons I have listed in other videos. But I'd like to end then with other suggestions. And there are public relations suggestions that I think would aid our cause. We are a data-consumed society. We like to specify things with exact numbers and percentages. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't think it's wise to say that an X percentage of missiles have been destroyed or are not being launched in comparison to prior days, only because we don't know the original figure. 93% of the missiles or 81% of the drones have fallen off, but we don't know how many are left. We don't know if the fall off is in part because of a strategy of a continued war. We don't know how deadly they are. We didn't think when the war started they would have missiles with cluster bombs. We knew they existed, but we didn't know the damage they would do. They obviously have decentralized enclaves in tunnels that are protected that we don't know fully about. Why not just say Iran is a huge country? It is much more militarily formidable than Afghanistan, Iraq, or other countries in the Middle East. We have done amazing work to attrite their drones and their ballistic missiles and their nuclear facilities. But in 30 days, it's almost impossible to guarantee that we can find and destroy all of the dispersed assets that are being used to attack our allies in the Gulf and Israel. However, we are making enormous progress, and we will do that, but there's going to be occasional, episodic, sporadic launches against civilian targets that we have to be prepared for. We should say as well that we have destroyed, as we have, all of their major naval assets. However, like the cartels, they have high-speed, what we would call PT boats in World War II, and they can be very dangerous. They can drop mines or they can launch rockets, and these are a worry, and they're very hard to find. They're very small, they're very fast, they work at night, but we're working on that. Rather than just to say we destroyed 90% of their Navy when there's might be 100 of these boats still there. I think at some point the military needs to get a better narrative about regime change. Again, re-emphasize, as we've said earlier, that was not the original aim of this operation, was to go in and try to destroy a regime or replace it. We learned that from Afghanistan and Iraq. It requires a long occupation, or it requires so-called boots on the ground. But there's certain things about this particular situation that may allow for a regime change as a collateral dividend. One of them is Israel may want to continue with its own operations because it's more vulnerable and it's nearer to Iran than we are. Number two, in Afghanistan and Iraq, there was not a sizable dissident pro-American population as there is in Iran. And so the damage that we're doing to that government may ripple out for weeks at an end, and we may see regime change in a month after we're through. We could see it in 2 weeks. We could see it in a year. And all of that would be because of the decision we made to attack this odious regime. We need to explain Israel, as I said earlier. Israel does not control the United States. Nobody controls Donald Trump. The left has said that again and again. He's reckless. I think the Europeans have called him a bull in a nuclear china shop. You can't talk to him. You can't convince him. The idea that Benjamin Netanyahu would be pulling the strings, that's not happening. In fact, if you would read Israeli publications, read the Jerusalem Post, read the Israeli Times, almost daily the narrative is that Donald Trump has an agenda different than Israel, and we have to be very careful as Israelis to follow exclusively and completely the American lead, because they want to be independent and autonomous as we should expect. But the people in Israel do not believe that they're running Donald Trump's show. So we need to explain that very carefully. And finally, we don't want a ground war. Ground war, as I said in an earlier video, is synonymous with a misadventure in the Middle East, as we remember from Afghanistan, Iraq, the first Gulf War, perhaps. But we can say that if we decide that Karg Island or the corridor north of the Strait of Hormuz are doable with a incursion, or maybe you could have a sanitary corridor, we would not invade Iran, we would not occupy it, but we might want a one-off strike. We don't even have to get that explicit. We can just say we have the options for a ground war. We don't expect it, but that alternative is there should it expedite our original objectives. And I think if we were just a little bit more careful about the messaging, it would better reflect the military reality, which is unusually good and almost amazingly successful. Thank you very much. This is Victor Davis Hanson for the Daily Signal.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate his input and just really ironing out Because if we heard that from our media, I think we would be in a little bit better position. But our media is allowed to propagandize us, right? With the modernization of the Smith-Month Act. They are allowed to give us the propaganda, which would typically be given to other countries to keep them unsettled. But they're keeping us unsettled. Why would they want to keep us unsettled? Because there are, unfortunately, people behind the scenes of our federal government that want to destabilize the United States. It's interesting. Again, people want to destroy the United States, but they want to benefit from it. So I'm not sure how you juxtapose the two, but that's where people are. It's like you want to destroy the house that is giving you some form of benefit, but you want to continue to destroy it. It's very weird. It's very weird to me. But let's get into a little bit of our trending topics, even on all sides. And it says Trump seeks $152 million to reopen Alcatraz prison. Now, people have tried to talk him out of this only because Alcatraz itself, it is, I want to say well, yeah, it's more of a monument now than it could be a prison because there's so much of it that would need to be restored, right? You got rusted pipes. I mean, it's just an old prison, and it's like, do you just blow it up and start from like dirt and build it up from there? Because to restore what's there, yeah. People, like I said, people have tried to talk him out of it, but he still may want to go forward with it. Another topic, U.S. fighter jet was shot down over Iran and crew members were rescued. Say, thank goodness they were. And here's another topic or article, the impact of Trump's tariffs 1 year later after Liberation Day. 1 year after Liberation Day. So that's good. That's good. Just looking at the impact. And I think this was from last week where DeSantis had signed off on a Florida SAVE Act requiring proof of citizenship. And this is the one thing that Democrats fear most. As I showed you in that video from MS Now, it's like, why do you fear proof of citizenship for people to vote? They should be proving that they're citizens to vote, right? You would think that would be happening anyway, right? Because they say that people aren't voting in mass. All right. If that was true, then why are states not requiring ID at all to vote? If people who aren't from this country aren't voting in mass, that's weird to me. That's weird. That means you're just assuming that everybody here is a naturalized citizen and their allegiance is to the United States. That's an assumption when it's not true, because there are people here on visas. There's people here on green cards. There are people here on different forms of visas, right? That we found out, like HB1 visas, J1 visas, H2B visas, right? There's all these different types of visas that does not make someone a citizen of this country and their allegiance to this country, giving them the ability to vote. But when you say there's no ID required, how are you even checking if they're eligible to vote? Yeah. So it leaves a lot of questions in the air. But I want to thank you guys for joining me here on Unfiltered Vision News for our Monday recap. We'll be back tomorrow for Telecall Tuesday. So again, thank you so much for joining me. And remember, stay well, stay focused, and stay unfiltered. We'll see you in the next one.